Hello and welcome to this video, which is designed to help teachers of modern foreign languages get the best from Exampro. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll be showing you some of the important aspects of Exampro that you might have missed. When you first log into Exampro, you get what we call is the gatekeeper. Now this can be quite confusing, especially if your school has subscribed to quite a few subjects. So it's useful on the left hand side to drill down to languages, and then you only see the subjects that are relevant to you. The first thing you notice is that we've got two tabs. We've got the current year and the archive tab. The idea here is that we've got the specs that are the new specs being currently taught, and we've got the older specs there in the archive. This is because there are going to be some topics, for example, that are on the old specifications that aren't on the new specifications, and you might want to use those questions for resit candidates, or if you want to extend some of your students to areas of the subject that they wouldn't have done in the actual GCSE, the new GCSEs, then those questions are still there. Now a quick note on the new A-levels. When we first started talking to AQA and the examiners, we were told that the A-levels had changed quite substantially. Normally with Exampro we take old paper questions and we just remap them to the new specifications, and we told that there were quite big changes to the topics and the types of question in the new A-levels, and we felt at first that there wasn't enough questions to be able to pull together useful question banks. We've now re-evaluated that, and we've released our A-level new question banks for the new specifications. They include at the moment the specimen papers and any legacy questions that are absolutely fine for use. So if they happen to be on topics that are in the new question in the new papers, then they're there. If they're the right type of question, then they're there. We're going to be adding, very unusually for Exampro, some new questions. These might be, for example, where there is a question that had a stimulus that was on Hollywood films in the old specification. Those films in the new specification would now have to be on French films, and therefore we'd change the stimulus to talk about French films. So we're going to be adding those as the autumn term comes along. Back to GCSEs, which are there and they're complete, and obviously we add to them each year. If I go into the question bank here, then it's useful to know where the questions come from. So the first thing you can do is you can go to the content button, and you can see that we go all the way back to 2008. Now if you look at 2008, for example, in the higher tier there, you're missing questions 19, 20 and 21. That's probably because those questions were not relevant to the new specification. So we've gone through and we've tagged all of these questions to make sure that they're relevant. Obviously the further back in time you go, the more that the questions may not quite be the same style as the questions, or they might not have the same work on accessibility that AQA have been doing recently, but they will certainly be useful questions for your use in your lessons for preparing your students. If you want to find out where individual questions come from, a good tip is to use this question ID button. So if I click on that, I get a little code which at first looks completely impenetrable. The first ones are the specimen papers, so that's the SP. 1F would be the first foundation tier paper, and then question 4. And then if we go back in time, because as you go down you go back in time, this one for example would be 2016 in the summer, paper 2 higher, question 8. And so you can work out where the questions came from by using that method. Now, people know about the searches, but people don't necessarily know how to use the searches most efficiently. So, for example, if I was teaching identity and culture, and then I search on identity and culture, I've got 161 questions. I could then say I've got a higher tier class, they're all going in for the higher tier paper, so I want to look for some higher tier questions. I've now drilled down within identity and culture to higher tier paper questions only. I can then look through those questions and choose the questions I want for my test or my homework or whatever it is. Maybe I also decide that I want some overlap questions, so I'm going to put them in. Now what I haven't also done actually in these questions is looked at the type of questions, so I could look at whether they are listening questions or whether they're speaking questions or whatever within that. So we can add the different searches together and we can change each of the searches or press all to get rid of that search. So that's a really useful way of planning the questions and finding the precise questions you need for that for your purposes. I've then got this test here. I'm sure it doesn't make any sense at all, but this is a test. It was on identity and culture, and I can save that. Now I could use that, I could download it immediately as a PDF, which I can print out. It gives you a very nicely paginated, nicely set out PDF. Or you can download it as Word, which is quite useful for editing. So people edit, they take away the answer lines, for example, to give the students that to just answer the questions in their books. Or you could go and change the stimuli yourselves, and or change the questions in some way, or to make sure that they're exactly the questions you want for your students. The other thing that happens when you save a test, and incidentally to find that test again, you go to this Open Save Documents box and then the test will be there. When I save that test, this share link appears. Now this share link is always 8 letters and then .exampro.net. If you click on that link or put it into a smartphone, then you get a web page which opens up with those questions, and as I say, you can use this as a smartphone or whatever. Your students can use this, so you can give that link to your students and you can share those questions with them so they can use them at home. You can also include listening questions. So for example, if I put together a quick test with just some listening questions in there, and then I save that one. The way you could find the listening files is by going to the resource files, and then you can play the listening files from there. If you share, and you can choose what to share, you can choose the resources, save the changes. If I then go to that one, then on each one of these I've got the listening files, so your students can actually do the listening at home for each of those different questions as well. So that's really powerful for them to be able to do that. You can also in class you can download those questions and you could send them home or whatever as you wished, obviously, but I think sharing it via that link is particularly efficient. What you notice there is I hadn't got any answers in there, so if I then choose to share the mark scheme as well, when I go into that, then I get the mark schemes in there. So that's really helpful for your students, and you could release the mark schemes maybe a week after you've given them the homework. Now, a way that teachers like to use Exampro is to, well, teachers say to me that they want to know a way of knowing which questions they've used and which they haven't used, so they don't give the same questions in topic tests. So let's say I'm teaching employment and I want to look at a reading paper for the employment. What I could do at the beginning of the topic is I start a new document. There's 44 questions on reading in employment. I've clicked on the top button, top question, and I move my cursor down and click on the bottom button after pressing Shift. So I'm holding Shift down and press that. I then highlight the whole of those questions and I get this little plus sign. I can press that plus sign and I get all of those questions going into my new document. You can do that for up to 60 questions at a time. If I then add a second document, I can then go through those questions and decide which ones I want to keep aside as my topic test. So I can choose that one, and I choose that one, and I'm going to choose that one, and I'm going to choose that one. Then I save that one as employment test, and I know not to use those questions with my students, and I can save this one as an employment class, and I'm more than happy to use all of those questions in homeworks or whatever. You can plan that out in advance. It takes you minutes to do it, and it saves you a lot of hassle in the future. It's also very useful if you've got shared classes or you've got more than one teacher in a school, so you know who's doing what. The other thing you could do, of course, is you can then share that link with your students as their revision materials ready for the test, knowing that none of those questions are in the test. So that's really helpful. One thing about those links, please feel free to put them in your VLEs, to give them out on worksheets, share them with your students, feel very happy to do so, but please do not put them on the internet, because what we don't want is the questions that you're keeping separate to be published by some other teacher on the internet. And certainly do not share any passwords for Exampro with students, because what we find out is that they stick them immediately on the student room, and thousands of students are then accessing the questions that you want to keep secret. So please don't share on the internet. The last really small but really powerful tip about Exampro is how best to use examiners reports. Now, if you've ever read an examiner's report, they tend to be quite lengthy documents, they're quite dry, they're quite difficult to get your head around because they're not relevant to your teaching right then. If, say, I'm teaching healthy living, so if I go to theme 1 and then go to, I can't find it anymore, so I'll just choose something else, social media. That's not a great example, there's only one there. Mobile technology, there's 8 questions here. Now I can go through, the first question doesn't have anything there because it's got a specimen paper, they won't have examiners reports. If I go to the next questions, then I will find that these questions have examiners reports. And we're starting to see here the items that the students had difficulties in the vocabulary. Sometimes it explains things that they do wrong in the questions. This is a really powerful way of spotting the misconceptions, spotting the issues that students have, and making sure that you address those in your teaching prior to starting a new topic. So that's a really helpful little tip, I think you'll find, for going through all of these things. And making sure that you're teaching most effectively each of these topics. Well, I hope that's been a helpful little video. Please give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you and goodbye.